Welcome to Amy Learns to Cook. I'm Eric, and on today's show, we're going to make some pulled pork using a pressure cooker. Now, I know what you're thinking, because I'm used to doing it all the time in the barbecuer, but there's times when you don't have time to do it all day in a smoker, or maybe you don't have a smoker. So the wonderful people at Shamrock provided us with a pressure cooker so we can do a test and review. And we thought doing a pulled pork would be a perfect test for it, right? Because this is something that takes hours to cook it in a normal way. But in this puppy, we can do it in about a little over an hour. So we're going to also make Amy's famous honey BBQ sauce to put all over the top when we're all done. So doesn't it sound delicious? It does to me. So why don't you join me as I cook a pulled pork using the Shamrock pressure cooker. I just want to thank the people at Shamrock for providing us with this pressure cooker so we can do this test and review. I think it's a wonderful device, and we're going to prove it today when we throw this hunk of Boston butt in there. Pork shoulder, if you're not familiar with it, I mean, we know what pulled pork is, but do you really know? Some people think when they hear the word Boston butt, it comes from the rear of the pig, and that's not really true. Shoulder, you know, common sense, it has lots of fat and lots of muscle, and that's why it takes a long time to cook, especially if you're going to do the low, slow part. But there's lots of things that go on when you cook it. There's a lot of collagen that turns into just wonderful gelatin when you do cook it for such a long time, and that's what helps make it so flavorful and just moist. When you have lean cuts of meat like pork chops, you know, you have to brine it and do all kinds of crazy stuff and be careful how you cook it, otherwise it's just flavorless and it's dried out. And pulled pork is not that way. You have to be careful how you cook it, but for other reasons, it's just wonderful. And it's a cheap, inexpensive cut of meat. So as long as you know how to cook it, it's wonderful. If you don't know how to cook it, it's going to taste like a rock. It's going to feel like a rock. And today we're not going to do that. It's going to be wonderful. So let's get started. I'm going to go ahead and wash up the meat. I'm going to make sure this guy's all clean, and we're going to get started. All right, here is the star of our show here. This is a 6-7 pound butt here. It's a little small guy because I'm going to be the only one eating it. Amy's not a big fan of that. I'm just going to trim off a little bit of fat there on that side. He has plenty of fat. Don't waste your time trimming too much off because, believe me, it's going to render anyways. And I got good ideas towards the end, right? I do have this fat cap here. Seasonings and stuff does not adhere to fat too well, especially when it renders off. So I'm going to go ahead and trim it away a little bit. Usually when I'm doing barbecue, I'm going to go ahead and leave a bunch of it in place. The idea is it helps protect, you know, and all that good stuff when it's cooking. And we always have arguments, you know, fat cap up, down. In a pressure cooker, I don't know if it really matters. But the biggest thing I just want to get to is we've got plenty in place for moisturizing purposes. I want to get to the meat so I can get some flavor on here, and that stuff is going to go off anyways. So we're going to leave pretty much everything else intact. All right, something we can do for flavor besides rubbing, which we'll get to in a second, is we can do an injection. This piece of meat is too big to just marinate and wait for it to get in there. And you definitely don't want to brine because it doesn't really need a brine because it's got plenty of fat to keep it moist. But we do want some salt on there for flavor, right? So what we're going to do is an injection here. So I got this little, I don't know, you can really inject with anything you really want. You can just take apple juice and throw it in there, maybe throw a little salt in there, or if you like Worcester sauce, just tons of things. So what I'm doing here is I've got maybe 1/3 of a cup of apple juice, 1/4 of a cup of water. I got some liquid smoke here because we're going to cheat. I'm just going to pour maybe a teaspoon's worth in there. We'll reserve this other 2 tablespoons for later. I got a couple of tablespoons of kosher salt, and I got maybe a 1/4 cup of just white granulated sugar. If you've got some onion powder or something you want to put in there, then you can do that as well. the main goal is you don't want to clog up your injector. So if you're going to go with some stuff and make it goopy, that's better for the outside, or to put in the broth mix. And I do like Worcester sauce, so I don't know, put a little bit in there. All right, that's good. It's not official, right? And we'll just stir that up. So I'm going to actually pour this, I think, into this little guy here. It'll work better with my injector. Okay. So we're using an injector. See this guy right here? I don't know if I can get that in there. So it's something you can pick up at most supermarkets, and it works wonders for getting flavor into big pieces of meat here. And I've already put a little bit of oil on the little washer or little gasket in there, so it makes it really nice and smooth. Otherwise, you run the risk of damaging it. The idea is to just poke down, but not all the way through, and then you can inject in there. And it's starting to get kind of full. And we'll pull it out. You might get liquid everywhere. We'll poke somewhere else. Pull that out. Oops, shot a bunch there. And we'll suck some more in here. There's no real formula to this. Some people, what they'll do is they'll just imagine this is like a ham, and where normally you put like little, 1-inch squares where you would put your cloves. You can imagine that with this guy. The problem is if you inject too many holes nearby, what's going to happen is fluid's just going to pop out of, them, kind of like Old Faithful, I guess. All right, more fun here. More flavor, right? So we're going to go ahead and get some rub on there. Before we do that, I like to use mustard. Mustard does wonderful things. It's acidic, so it tenderizes sort of, but it also gives it a nice sticking place for a rub to stick onto. Once again, not something you'd want to leave on for days and days because it'll turn it all into mush, but it's worked good for us in the past. You can do this on ribs. You can do this on really anything that you want to put rub on and cook. We'll get that guy flipped in a second. And now we're going to go ahead and just use some commercial barbecue rub. Anything that you like, because I really can't recommend anything, right? Everybody has their own flavors. This stuff here, though, has, I think, chili powder and oregano in it, among other things. It's high in salt. It's got some sugar in it. It's just something that goes ooh-ah-ee, right? Let's go ahead and get this meat flipped over. And of course, I'm just doing my best here to use one hand for the meat and then the other hand, because I don't want to contaminate. I don't want, germs and stuff all over my mustard and stuff, right? So we've got them pretty covered. And this is something you can be really generous with your rub. You're not really trying to massage it into each pore. Your goal is just to get a nice, relative coverage on it. Now, when you're doing this in like a grill or a smoker, this is what helps form a crust. Now, something that you don't do on a grill or smoker is you don't brown your meat. But that's what we're going to do next. And that's going to help help do what we're going to do here, right? So we're going to try to get more flavor on this by browning the meat. So we're going to go ahead and get this guy all nice and rubbed up, and then it's time to start cooking. All right, more funness. Now we're actually getting ready to cook this thing. So we're going to actually try to brown the meat first a little bit before we put all the liquid in and then do the whole steaming, pressure cooking and stuff. So browning meat always adds flavor, right? So we're going to go ahead and start that. So right there is brown button, so let's hit that.
Oil setting. Add a small amount of oil to the pot if desired.
So we're going to add a little oil. So I'm just using a little olive oil, but you can use anything, right? Vegetable oil, whatever.
Food in the cooking pot, according to recipe.
She wants us to add the meat, so we'll add the meat. Wouldn't want to upset the pressure cooker, would we?
Keep lid off when browning.
We're going to keep the lid off, like she says.
The preset time is 30 minutes.
30 minutes.
Press minus to adjust time. Press start button to begin browning.
So it took about a minute or so for this to come up to temperature. And as you can see, it's sizzling. We got about a tablespoon of oil in there. And so right now it's browning. My goal is to brown it for maybe 2 minutes on each side. And then we'll get into doing the whole cooking part. All right, so there, we've already browned one side. You can see how nice and purty that is, right? Our goal is not to burn anything. It's just to caramelize or get a little browning. We try to develop a little bit of a crust on this. So that way, when we shred it, you know, you get those little nuggets of fine cooking, right? And without browning, or doing it in a barbecue, you know, where you'd also be able to develop a crust. You know, that's what people look for when they eat pulled pork. So we're going to continue browning each side on this, and then we'll be back. All right, so we've had this guy going now for about 15, 16 minutes here, getting it browned on most of the sides here. It looks really nice. All right, so let's go ahead and get this guy going. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put the lid on. Got them on, yay. We're going to move this to lock. So now let's go ahead and turn this thing on. So we're going to hit the setting pressure button. We're going to hit it again because I want the 15 pounds. It defaults to 15 minutes. I want to do this for about 60. I'm just going to hold it down until it gets up there. It's almost there. It's up in the 50s, 60. All right. Now we're going to go ahead and hit start. So now it's going to start working. So we have this in the lock position over here. Unlock is over here. And right now it's in the steam, which is what you'd want to be in when you want to relieve pressure. In this case, we want to build up pressure. So we're going to move it over here. And there it is. It's over there. So right now we're good to go. Let me go and show this little guy here. This little guy right here, he's bouncing around because there's steam in there. But as it builds pressure, he's going to lock and pop up a little bit. And then the countdown should begin from our 60 minutes. So the total cook time is going to be a little bit over an hour. It needs time to build up the pressure, cook it to 60, and then we'll release. All right, this is in like an 8-hour keep warm mode. And we're just going to go ahead and hit the start stop, which now stops the cooking. We're going to do what's called natural release, which is important because this is a hunk of meat, especially something that we want to come out nice and tender. And I run the risk of it tightening up and everything. In general, when you cook meat, you want it to rest, relax for 5 or 10 minutes. Doesn't matter if you barbecue it, cook in the oven. I like to tin it. Well, this is the equivalent of doing that. And sometimes you might want to keep this in consideration of your cooking time. So cooking for roughly 60 minutes or so, and this is going to take maybe 10 minutes or so. It's not a big deal. After about 10 minutes, I'm just going to release any pressure on it. It should relax during that time period, and we can break out the bear claws and start pulling on it. So we'll be back in 10 minutes. All right, I got my bear claws in case you've never seen these before. They look like that. They're coming pretty handy for picking up hot pieces of meat and for also shredding. Come on, unlock. There we go. So let's go ahead and put him over there. So get some of this stuff to drip. So as expected, we've got the 2 cups of liquid plus a lot more in there. It's mostly fat. And I'll tell you in a minute what I have in mind for that. For right now, we've got this hunk of meat here. And, hi Amy, what are you doing?
Go.
I'm just wondering why Amy is coming for a closer look. Normally if it was something that she'd like chicken or something, that I'd expect, or bacon, but she just wants to see how it turned out. I think it turned out pretty good. It's a big hunkin' piece of meat. It's steaming. It smells really good. So let's get to shredding here. So. Oh, and any good measure of a barbecue or cooking in general with butts is if the bone just comes out like on its own, that's good. Usually what I like to do is I like to just go for the bone and pull it out. And if the bone has any resistance, it's not done and you need to cook it longer. And if the bone just comes out like butter, then you know you're good. I just got so happy, I just started shredding without even thinking about that. And I found the bone. So on the boneless ones, you can't really do that. But on the ones that have bone, you definitely use that as your thermometer. So I'm going to go ahead and get the barbecue sauce ready. All right, I've already had a chance to take a piece and it tastes pretty good. This is some of the stuff that I pulled out. Just basically big globs of fat, if there are any left. If there's any like skin looking stuff, bone, pull that out. Nobody wants to eat that, right? I have a half of the recipe of Amy's world famous honey BBQ sauce, right? I don't want to put a full 3 cups in here because then that's all you would taste. The cup here, cup and a half here, I think is actually pretty close to what I need. Worst case, I'll grab more. I think that's going to be good. I don't want to make a soup out of it. What you need to do is cook this for your guests, whether it's your family, friends, or yourself. Some people like to have the pulled pork by itself so they can taste the pork and then add the sauce, you know, or if you have a variety of sauces, let them pick what they want. But if you're just cooking this for your kids and stuff and your husband or whatever, or your husband's cooking for your wife and kids, then just do it all once, right? Especially if you know what they want. It looks like this is mixing up pretty tasty. It's not super saucy. That was the one thing I didn't want, is I didn't want the sauce to overwhelm. The little bit of meat that I did taste was not smoky. So the little bit of smoke I put in there really didn't do anything for me. But then I'm used to barbecue. Maybe somebody who's never had barbecue would say this is fabulous. I mean, I think it tastes great and everything, and I would say it's definitely something you can consider during the wintertime when you've put your smoker away or your grill away, or once again, if you don't have those things, you can't, then this definitely would be good. So I think I've slopped this around enough. So time to, well, I'm going to take a little pre-test right here. So right here, I haven't slopped enough of that stuff on here. Well, that's all I taste. I still taste a good amount of this and a little bit of that. So if you're ever concerned, I would say a cup and a half is a good amount for that. Now let me get some bread so I can do some justice and make a big old sandwich. All right, the really fun part, eating. So obviously it's pulled pork, so it's tender. All that stuff we threw in the broth added salt to it, which it needed obviously for flavor. You don't want just a bland piece of meat. So the ham base, which I've never used before, obviously contributed. And then we just threw, Worcester sauce. We threw all kinds of good, wonderful stuff in there that brings out a lot of flavor, so it's really good. I still don't taste smoke. Now, we did put a little bit of liquid smoke in the formula for the barbecue sauce, And so there's a little bit there, so that tastes good. I think the average person, if you've ever had made slow, like crock pot pork, then you're going to pretty much get probably the same results here, except it's a lot faster. I think this is wonderful. Let me take another bite, right? I'm going to give the Shamrock 2 thumbs up. I thought it browned the meat. I think it did a good job there. It came up to temperature and it did what I wanted. In terms of the pressure cooking, it did a good job. Because I haven't done a pork before in a pressure cooker, it was just a little surprising to me how that all figures in. So the Shamrock did a good job. It cooked for the amount of time it did, came up to pressure, didn't really leak. So I think it did a good job. The one thing I noticed was if you put the lid on with the lock and unlock towards the side where the digital display is, we had a really hard time getting that on and to work. But if we put it the opposite side, so it's away from the display, it seemed to lock and unlock way easier. So I don't know if that's by design or not. I really didn't pay attention. On other other pressure cookers, usually there's only one way to put a lid on and things do that. This one, it just wasn't as obvious to me. So as long as I kept that in mind, it worked fine for me. The recipe itself, I'm a little surprised only because I haven't really done this before. I'm so used to using a smoker. I'm so used to it cooking for several hours with smoke. You wrap it in foil, it kind of steams, and after about 10 hours, maybe 12 hours, you can either rip it apart right then and there, or sometimes when we're in comps, we would actually let it steam even longer in a ice chest that we fill with towels and stuff. And then once again, it just rips apart really easy. Here, you put a big piece of meat in there, an hour seemed reasonable, and parts of it shredded really easy, parts of it didn't. And I really thought that was odd, even though it was 200 degrees in the middle, and that's normally enough. So what my recommendations are is, if you're going to have a 6, 7, 8 pound piece of meat and you're going to shred it, maybe cut it into pieces, 1 pound pieces, 2 pound pieces, and then that way those little guys will cook a little faster. Obviously, if you have a bone in there, you got to cut around the bone, of course. If it's boneless, then it doesn't matter. And then you can probably cook it for maybe 60 minutes. You might need to cook it for maybe 75 minutes if you got one big piece of meat or it's just maybe cut into 2 pieces. I think the natural release method works better. It's going to shoot water either way. This guy, we did some tests and it shot water and made a little bit of a mess either way. But I also, under natural release, I didn't let it go a full natural release, which might take 20 minutes. I cut it short after 10 minutes, so there was just a little bit of pressure left in there. So once again, it's not the fault of the pressure cooker, it was just my cooking style. So I thought I did a wonderful job on the meat as long as I gave it enough time and as long as I sat there and let it rest. If you sit there and do a quick release, you're not letting it rest, and you really need to let it rest. It's different than taking meat out of the oven or out of the barbecue, foiling and let it sit for 10 minutes. This thing, under pressure, with it unplugged, turned off, whatever, that counts as giving it a rest. I didn't quite realize that until I started using this thing. So take that. Just like anybody else here, meat can have recipes, but it's not exactly like you're cooking bread or a cake. Every animal is going to cook differently. There's just general guidelines for doing it. If you undercook it, put it back in and cook it for another 10 minutes. It's not a big deal. Once it's fork tender, or if you have a bone and you can pull the bone out nice and smooth, you should be good. Those are just my little tips. So once again, this guy did a good, I'll give him 2 thumbs up. And I'm definitely going to try other meats in this just to see how they cook. And I'm sure everybody's probably going, yeah, Eric, we've all done that, but I haven't. So for me, teaching you how to do something for somebody who's never done it before, this is my perspective on it. So I don't care if you're a 13-year-old and you want to cook for your parents, or maybe you're 40 years old and you want to cook for somebody. If you've never done it before, take my reactions and tips, and I think you'll do better, because there's so many information on the web. The temperature, or excuse me, the cooking time according to the book said if it's barbecue, cook it for like 40 minutes. They didn't really say, first of all, smoked. That means smoke it, cook it somewhere else, reheat it in this for 40 minutes. But that's not what I'm doing. I'm cooking from scratch. So I need a guideline that says if you're buying it from a refrigerator, you want to cook it, 75 minutes might actually be the magic number, or 60 minutes if you cut it into smaller pieces, and then that way the smaller pieces can cook faster. So that's a good guideline. Anybody who says you can cook this stuff in 40 minutes, I'm not sure how they did it, unless they did in fact cut it into really small pieces, or it's already been cooked once. Because this stuff is tough as heck if you didn't know. And this guy did a pretty good job tenderizing it when I gave enough time. So once again, 2 thumbs up for that. And once again, Amy's barbecue sauce, fabulous. We'll put a link down in the description below in case you haven't seen that video. I suggest you give it a try. Otherwise, if you're in a hurry, just use store-bought. But this stuff tastes good, believe me. I made it, it's easy, and it works good. So I give her sauce a 2 thumbs up too. So after cooking, taking the meat out and doing all the good stuff that you want, you're going to have quite a bit of liquid left in the pressure cooker, and it's going to be a lot of fat in there. And for that reason, I don't recommend you cook it in barbecue sauce. I really recommend you stick with 2 cups of a broth, like a soup or something of your favorite flavor to put in it. Water is just too boring. We got other stuff to do than being boring, right? But what do you do with this? So now you got a lot of flavorful stuff, but it's got all this fat in there, right? Well, if you got a fat separator, you can go ahead and try to separate it that way. Then you can take this leftover soup broth stuff, and I don't know if you want to try to make a gravy somehow with it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cover it saran wrap. I'm going to throw the whole thing in the fridge, let it sit overnight. At that point, all the fat should rise to the top, because it usually does. It gets kind of hard. Then you can just remove that easily and get rid of it. Now you're going to have a combination of like collagen type stuff, gelatin that's kind of thick, but it's not fat, and then the broth itself. The gelatin will, when it heats up, obviously it becomes liquid again, you can use it. So I'm thinking it'll be good to flavor rice, right? I mean, a lot of times when we cook rice, we just add water, which is okay. Or maybe you can add some, chicken stock or something to it to give it some flavor. But I'm thinking I might use this. So that's how I'm going to do it. But you might want to think, maybe you can make soup or something out of it, but definitely keep it. It's got plenty of flavor in it. We just got to get all that fat out of it. So either use a fat separator or throw it in the fridge and let the fat come to the top, skim it out that way, and you'll be good. While it's still liquid, you can always pour it through a sieve, whatever, strainer, and get maybe the big chunks of stuff out that you don't want. But then after that, you can just get the big chunk of fat and toss it out. So that's my idea. If you like this recipe and you like this video, please subscribe below, give us a comment and a like, and visit our website at amylearnstocook.com. And we're on Pinterest. We're on Pinterest and Twitter at Amy Learns to Cook. So on this particular guy, he actually has a button on here, if I can see it over here, called brown.
Wrong button.
Oops.
Put food in the cooking pot.
Oops.
Change the recipe.
Wrong button. Yum yum. See, I can be civilized. I got a napkin, right? I didn't ram it in my face. Well, maybe. Ah. Mmm.